Hey there, welcome back. It's part 10 of How to Fix US Soccer. Today, we are going to be talking about MLS and the MLS calendar and how that impacts youth prospects and then obviously through time impacts US soccer. It's our domestic league, so it makes sense to talk about this. Before we hop into that, I want to let you know, in case you didn't watch the 49-minute video where I talked about this earlier in the week, I have started a Patreon. If you click on the link that's in the description below, it'll take you to the Patreon page. There's a video there. It's only like 2 minutes long that explains why I'm doing a Patreon. I'm going to mess that up a lot, so just get used to it. But it's a way for you to financially support the channel, financially support me, help me buy better equipment, stuff like that. You're under no obligation to do that at all. Obviously, I still have ads that are going to be running. The goal is eventually to not have ads in the middle of my content through getting direct support from my viewers. So enough about that. I did want to say, though, we're already up to like 8 patrons. So Chris Askew, Eduardo Valente, Josh Doler, Craig Hadley, Navid Thompson, Sani Plays, Nicholas Dew, Chris Carpenter, and Egil Fenar Andresen, who I believe is from Iceland, and that's awesome. Thank you so much for the support. That's crazy that we already have 8 people that are signed up to help support us here. So, enough about that. Let's talk about MLS. Yes. Major League Soccer. The soccer league that's run like every other American sports league and is destined to never become anything because that's how they run it, right? Take the Columbus Crew. They unfortunately lost last night as you're watching this video. So they're not going to MLS Cup, but they are going to Austin. Like that's going to happen. And that's because it's a franchise model with MLS. I actually didn't know this until about a year ago, with a single entity model where it's really like if you're negotiating to buy a player from an MLS team, if you're a European club, you negotiate with MLS. That's twisted. No one else does that. We'll get into all that. It connects to this. I want to talk to you about the calendar specifically. So let me get this pulled up for you. So let me go back to the Major League Soccer calendar. Regular season began on March 3rd and concludes on October 22nd, and then the playoffs kick in October 25th, all the way going to December 9th. So we get essentially 2/3 of December, January, and February. So 2 2/3 months off in the late December to all the way to February timeframe. Okay, what's the problem with that? Like, they structured it to try and avoid major sports and other, you've got October playoffs in baseball that you're running up against, but then like no one's got a championship game on December 9th because like college football is usually the weekend before, or not before, but like the conference championships are the weekend before, and then obviously college football gets into like January. So they've structured it, my guess, that way to, one, there's weather concerns, we'll talk about those, but 2, to try and like not be on TV when somebody else is on TV so that you can try and hog hold the eyeballs. And that makes sense. The only problem with that is, let's take a look at the Premier League. Okay. August 11th through May 13th. So they take half of May, June, and July off. So roughly the same period of time in terms of the amount of time off, but they don't, like, it's August to May. So they go through winter, all that kind of stuff. Obviously weather is different in various parts of the United States in winter, so that plays into it. But okay, so you've got August to May. Let's look at the Bundesliga. August to May, almost the exact same dates, August to May. And a lot of European leagues do this model where they do August to May. Now there are some leagues where they do get like really bad winters where they take a winter break for a month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, depending on where it's at, right? To, allow for that to happen so you're not playing in snow. Here's why this is a problem, okay? If you're a youth player coming up through the U.S. soccer system, not the official U.S. Soccer Federation system, just U.S. soccer in general, Eventually, you get recognized, you get moved to an elite team, you do pay to play, which, again, if you haven't seen that video, you should go back and watch that. I'll try to remember to have that pop up for you. Over here. You get noticed, and an MLS Development Academy picks you up. Because here's how this works. Depending on where the MLS club is and where you're at, you can fall into their homegrown territory. It's super complicated, so I'm not going to explain it really well. Like, it is incredibly complicated. But essentially, it's like they get to claim a certain amount of territory around them to say, like, any youth prospect in that region, we can claim as a homegrown player, and there's different rules about bringing them into the club and salary and blah, 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 and all this other stuff, right? They can essentially claim the player. So you get claimed by the club. The general idea in the rest of the world is you have scouts that go out, they find good talent. Okay? They bring them into the club. They start developing that talent. You sign a contract with the club, right? You start developing that talent. You develop it for a year, 2, 3, 5, whatever the time frame is, right? And the value, if you're doing a good job, the value of the player goes up. And at some point you go, the value of the player as a transfer to get that income is more important to their value to us on the soccer field or pitch, right? That makes sense. That makes complete sense. And then, so they sell the player, they take that income, and they go and they scout new ones. And like, there's your business model that takes care partially, not completely, of pay to play. Is now you're generating this revenue through transfers. Well, what does that have to do with schedules, Gray Hair Gaming? Well, if you go back and we look here at the Premier League, August to May, Bundesliga, August to May, they do have a January transfer window, but that's in the middle of the season. And that's usually well, here's a player that's surplus to requirements and we need to get rid of them, or, oh my gosh, we're terrible, we need to fire everyone, or transfer some people out, our most valuable players out while we can. We need to bring some new ones in. Like, it's usually more like adjustments rather than this is what our squad's going to look like this year. Because again, it's in the middle of the season. But they have a transfer window in the summer. That's obviously before the season begins. Okay, well, if your season begins in August and May and ends in May, there's your summer time frame. But if you're in Major League Soccer, your season doesn't end, in theory, until as early as October 22nd, right? When you don't make the playoffs. Or as late as December 9th. But May to August, that's the middle of your season. How many clubs are going to transfer somebody out in the middle of their season, not in a transfer window where they can go pick somebody else up? That's probably a really poor business decision. Like, I'm not going to sell my best player, even if you offer me the world, because they're my best player, and it's going to be hard to replace them in the middle of the season. And if I'm a player, I then have to wait until the end of October, or, you know, in the case of Toronto FC that's made the cup again, December 10th, before I can get transferred out. Okay, well, then I can hit a January transfer window, but then I'm more of the Band-Aid transfer than like the exciting, you know, like European clubs generally, this is a mass generalization, so bear with me. It's like they're going to get their transfers in, and they want to gel that squad in the summer if they can. They do their preseason tours. They come to America. You know, they put on their the friendlies or whatever, and we're like, yay, International Cup. What is that? But you know, it's PSG and Barcelona, even though it's not the full squad. You know, they do that, and it helps gel the squad, and like, this is what we do, and this is how we do it, and welcome to the club, and blah, 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 blah. Well, you don't get that if you're a player playing in MLS, and let's say you're playing in MLS because you came up through the youth system, and now you've made it to the first team. It's almost like you're kind of stuck. It's like if you're not good enough, yeah, maybe your club sells you in the middle of the year, but then that means you're not good enough. But if you are good enough, the club is going to be hesitant, at best, I think, to sell you on in the middle of the year when the other leagues are having their transfer windows in the summer. And so you end up having to wait. The other problem is like, okay, so let's say your club doesn't make the playoffs and your season ends on October 22nd. Well, you don't become available from a transfer window standpoint for those European clubs to buy you until January. Well, there's 2 months where you're training, like you're not going to be match sharp, right? It's a different thing I don't know, I'm not a professional footballer, but I can imagine it's a different thing from like going to the workout facility and working with somebody on passing and whatever versus playing in an MLS game and obviously then going to a European league and playing in a European league game. Taking 2 months off right before you join the team in January where you haven't had time to gel the team, that's hard. And I think it's bad for the American player. So then the question is, how do you fix it? Because the concern I've read online is like, well, Colorado gets snow. Minnesota gets snow. Well, one of Minnesota's first games as an MLS club was against Atlanta United, and it was in the snow. So you still get that with a March to December or October, whatever it is, time frame. So I think it makes immense sense to align your calendar with the good European leagues. I'm not saying you align it to all the leagues because they're not all exactly the same, but you want good players to move on. They either need to be superstars that make you a ton of money and be like lights out amazing, and maybe MLS would love to have that, but that's not how soccer/football works in the rest of the world. Like a lot of times that player is getting sold on because they're so valuable to the next team. The next team's got the money that you don't have. We're not going to be the richest league in the world. We do overpay for players from a salary standpoint to keep them here, and I think this is part of why. Versus if you align the calendar and we start in August and we go until May, then at the end of May, or whatever that looks like with the playoffs, you can sell those guys on. And then you can bring in players from Europe. And now like you're refreshing all the squad. Like you're getting the good players over to better leagues and you're bringing in European talent, which in theory makes the league more exciting, right? Chicago Fire going to win the World Cup, according to the journalists, right? Because they had one signing from the Bundesliga. I think it was the Bundesliga. That's the general idea. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this because it is a little weird. And like, yeah, I'm sure there's going to be stuff that you're going to run into where, you're competing with various people or various other sports leagues for the spotlight at various times. But at the end of the day, if you're a good sport and you have exciting players and exciting teams and you're doing good things, you're going to get the eyeballs and the sport will grow. I think this holds the sport back because the clubs aren't getting the transfer revenue that they would otherwise get, that they can then reinvest in players, scouts, infrastructure, like training facilities, whatever you want. You miss out on that. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Do you think we would need a winter break? Do you think it's a terrible idea? The snow thing used to bother me, but I think you can schedule around that. Hey, Colorado, from December to whatever, middle of February. I don't know what the season is out there. You're not going to have a home game, which is unfortunate, but we're going to give you a bunch of home games when it's warm and people will actually come, right? They'll get out of their houses and come down. So I think there's ways to kind of work with the schedule. Maybe it's like the first weekend of August until Memorial Day or something like that. So I'd love your thoughts on this. Do you think it's that big of a deal that the calendars don't align, or you just think MLS is so bad regardless of the calendar, or would that work? Leave a comment, subscribe, and if you really like it, obviously go to Patreon and subscribe, become a patron. I'm never going to get that right. Thanks again to the guys that have already joined the Patreon group. That is so cool to see, and we'll see you in the next episode. Have a good one.